Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Welcome to this session on implementing responsible purchasing practices and for us to be able to share some of our progress and lessons learned from the multi-stakeholder initiative working group on responsible purchasing practices, the common framework, and the learning and implementation community. Today's session is being recorded. And I'm going to pass straight over to Annette, who is going to give us the welcome. She is the head of the Division on Sustainable Transformation in Global Supply Chains at the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Thank you for being here, Annette.
Yes, a very good morning to all of you. Thank you, Hilary. I'm very glad to welcome you today for the public section and to share the progress and lessons learned of this important multi-stakeholder initiative and their learning and implementation community. I'm very glad that one of the MSIs involved in the development of the common framework and in organizing also this session is the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles. The partnership was initiated by the German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development years ago in 2015 with the aim to improve the conditions on global textile production. The topics discussed here are quite important to us. Making purchasing practices more responsible is very central to achieving both social and environmental improvement in supply chains. And the relationship between the buying companies and their supply chain partners impact the working conditions in the supply chain. It is therefore important to understand and shape the purchasing practices responsibly and work towards their improvement. We see at the moment an increasing recognition of the importance of responsible purchasing practices in quite a number of spheres. It's a dynamic area we're living in. For initiatives like the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles and other organizations hosting us today, living wages and purchasing practices is a key focus topic. Adopted in 2017, the OECD Due Diligence Guidance for the textile industry stresses the importance of responsible purchasing practices of retailers and brands to prevent contribution to harm. The topic is also increasingly relevant to legislation. To begin, the German Due Diligence Act mentions responsible purchasing practices, and we are committed to ensuring that it will also play a role in the upcoming EU directive on corporate sustainable due diligence, the EU CSRPP. This means that an increasing number of companies can be held accountable for human rights violations in their supply chains and how their own actions might contribute to this. And it's clear that developing responsible purchasing practices is an essential element of any company's due diligence efforts. The common framework with its 5 principles is therefore an important reference point for companies to understand what constitutes responsible purchasing practices. The learning and implementation community is bringing these principles to life by supporting companies to put them into practice. The participation in peer learning communities like the one we will be talking about today shows that quite a number of companies are on their way, wanting to engage more responsibly with their suppliers and taking significant action to critically review and improve their purchasing practices. As PM said, we believe this is an impactful approach, and we are quite glad to financially support the community through the Initiative for Global Solidarity, and we thank our Dutch colleagues for their financial contribution to the Sustainable Textile Initiative Together for Chain Stitch. I wish you and all of us a very insightful event. Thank you so much. Also to you, Hilary.
Thank you so much, Annette. I am going to, we're going to talk today about progress and learnings and also have a panel discussion. I'm going to pass now over to Tamar, who's the Senior Policy Director of Sustainable Fashion at Solidaridad. Thank you, Tamar.
Thank you, Hilary. So welcome everyone. As Hilary said, Solidaridad, one of the organizations behind the Common Framework. I'm briefly going to say a little bit more about what the Common Framework actually is and also how it can be used. So the Common Framework was developed as a reference document. You should see it as a common language that actually outlines what constitutes responsible purchasing practices. But please do not see it as a standalone thing. It is part of a broader human rights due diligence approach. The aim of the framework is to support companies to implement practical improvements in purchasing practices, not in splendid isolation, but together with supply chain partners, to eventually increase the scope for actually improved working conditions in these supply chains. So, as said, the Common Framework is not developed by one organization. It was developed by ETI Norway, Fair Wear Foundation, the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, and the former Dutch Agreement. It was not kind of developed from scratch. It's based on a mapping of existing resources. It was developed in consultation with ILO Better Work, Better Buying, STTI, and Amfori, and it actually also includes almost all of the recommendations from the manufacturer's perspective that you can find in the white paper of STTI, which I recommend you to read. When the first draft was developed, we did a public consultation in 2022, and we kind of transferred all that feedback into finally the updated version that you can find here on the link that you see. The Common Framework has 5 core principles. I'm not touching upon every of them in detail. The first one is integrating and reporting. Make sure that it's kind of how is it integrated in your organization? Is there buy-in, etc. The second one is about equal partnership. So what is the relationship that you have with your supplier? Is it based on equalness, mutual responsibilities, etc.? The third one is about collaborative production planning that kind of looks at all the different steps that you take within your organization when you buy a product. The fourth one is about fair payment terms that actually looks at on-time payments, but also at not putting a disproportionate burden on one of the two parties. The last one is about sustainable costing that, for example, looks at mechanisms for costing and wages. So the framework can be used by companies, for example, that want to improve their purchasing practices. They can think about what does it look like in practice? What topics do I need to think of? What kind of action can I actually take? You can use the framework as some kind of guidance to do a proper analysis. It's developed primarily for the garment industry, but companies in other sectors can also, for example, look at the overarching principles. MSIs can use the Common Framework to support companies to make changes, and trade unions and NGOs for actually advocacy work. I will touch upon the policymakers a little bit later. We actually want it to be used as a reference point for the industry. So as said before, it's available on the website. If you use it, please reference the source and the organizations that developed it. If you want to adapt it or use it in a different context, please reach out to the MSI working group. And maybe good to mention is that the organizations involved with the Common Framework are actually planning to develop guidelines for companies to check progress. So some examples of how it's been used as a reference point for the industry. The Sustainable Apparel Coalition actually updated their brand and retail module and included procurement practices related questions that were actually based on the Common Framework. We provided feedback and encouraged the Global Fashion Agenda Monitor to refer to the Common Framework. There have been several articles that reported the framework as a reference point for the apparel sector. There was actually a publication from Fair Trade Advocacy Office and the University of Portsmouth on purchasing practices that was structured around the 5 principles, and the industry we want highlighted the framework as an example of collaboration for alignment. So my last slide before I hand over. The involved organizations in the framework are lobbying for the inclusion of responsible purchasing practices within legislation. For the ESCS-DDD, there was actually a lot of lobby to include responsible purchasing practices as part of this broader human rights due diligence framework, using the framework as a reference. There was lobbying towards German legislators to kind of use the framework in the garment-specific guidance. But in principle, responsible purchasing practices are an essential part of the human rights due diligence process. It is the way that a company can assess its impact of its own behavior and take corrective action and make sure that its behavior is not putting kind of or having a negative consequence or influence on their business partners in the supply chain. Particularly, the overarching principles are a good description of responsible purchasing practices and can be seen as guidelines to legislation. So I'm now going to hand back over to Hilary, who is actually the facilitator of the MSI working group and also the project manager and facilitator of the learning and implementation community.
Thank you so much, Tamar. So let's dive in and talk a bit more about this community, the learning and implementation community. So these are the organizations that are involved. Solidaridad joined that group to represent and support companies who were part of the Dutch agreement. And I'll talk about Sustainable Terms of Trade initiative in a minute. So what is this community? So the community is a group of companies from Europe and the UK, garment companies, and they've committed to this 2-year journey, starting last year, meeting online every 2 months. And in between those meetings, the MSIs meet with those companies that are their members to support changes. And that common framework is a reference document for this community and for those meetings. So what's the goal? The goal is to certainly hoping for some changes and some improvements in purchasing practices within those companies, but also to build up case studies and learnings for other companies to use afterwards. We'll have an online tool that will be available after that period of 2 years. And also the MSIs are working with their own corporate members outside of the community to disseminate the learning. The really important element that I want to stress that I'll talk about more later is that the involvement of manufacturers is absolutely key and essential and central. And every other meeting is a discussion with manufacturers, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. So the Sustainable Terms of Trade initiative, many of you will know who that is. They represent apparel manufacturing associations across the world. They have been supporting the LIC to strengthen involvement and engagement of manufacturers. And they've done that in 3 ways: by inviting manufacturers to those meetings through local associations, and that's in addition to those who are invited by brands; by also supporting and empowering manufacturers to initiate conversations and potential changes with customers outside the community, and that's by giving those manufacturers a summary of a list of ideas to discuss with other companies after each meeting. And they also have offered that they are willing to support further action, facilitating engagement between brands and manufacturers to support change where that's requested. So we've been really encouraged by the participation and engagement that has happened. We usually have about 40 to 60 individuals from brands turning up to each meeting, and that's from a range of different departments, from commercial and design, as well as CSR. And we have 82% of the brands involved having commercial teams attending some or all of those sessions. And we've also had a really high level of engagement with manufacturers. In the last couple of meetings, we've had over 60 people from brands, but also 50 to 60 people from manufacturing from lots of different countries. So each brand invites 2 or 3 of their own strategic suppliers to join, and then the STTI contacts are also involved. So also every meeting has both manufacturing and brand voices as speakers. So we want to just acknowledge and recognize that there's loads of different really good stuff that's happening on responsible purchasing practices. And all of these different initiatives, some of them are mentioned there, different approaches and activities are needed in parallel. They're all complementary towards the same goals. Our particular focus is supporting practical changes and trying to have those really engaging conversations with supply chain partners to get those changes happening. But we are in conversation and with these other initiatives seeking alignment. Those are the companies that are involved. We'll send the slides later if you want to have a look at the list. The size of the participating companies, about half of them are medium-sized companies. They're from Netherlands, Germany, Norway, UK, and other places. They're all garment companies, but also some of them do shoes, accessories, workwear, outerwear, And the top supplying countries are China, Bangladesh, and Turkey, but quite a wide range of companies, of countries that they're sourcing from. At the start of the LIC, we did a survey, and it was interesting to hear from commercial teams that, of course, their targets, the margins, is one of the key obstacles to implementing purchasing practices responsibly. Of course, that's not a surprise. But interestingly, the second top response was a lack of understanding about how purchasing practices really practically impacts human rights risks. So that's something we're really focusing on. And the sustainability teams also said that there was room for improvement in terms of partnership and decision-making with commercial teams. So we identified three really key obstacles to implementing responsible purchasing practices. One of them was companies kind of functioning in silos, so there being a lack of communication and collaboration between CSR and commercial teams. Sometimes there being a lack of human contact between brands and manufacturers, lots of emails flying around, but not much video calls and visits. So, and then also the last one is senior level engagement. So those are three things that we really focused on in the community. I'm going to talk you through a process diagram, which we've given to the companies to kind of guide their thinking about the process that they're going through. So the first step here is initial internal engagement, identifying who those people are internally, having those conversations, gaining champions, doing some training. The second step is understanding what current purchasing practices look like. And we've produced a tool to help companies identify that in their cross-departmental teams, which is called the procurement cycle mapping exercise. And then we've encouraged companies to partner that with gaining supplier feedback on purchasing practices and their impact, to then pull those two things together to assess their current purchasing practices and where there is room for improvement, to prioritize ideas for action, and then to trial actions and implement them. And the important aspect here is to make sure there's collaboration with suppliers right the way through that process. So we've provided exercises and tools for these different steps, the procurement mapping cycle, as I mentioned, guidelines on gaining feedback from suppliers, a tool to help them identify those initial actions, mapping their own practices against the common framework. And then we've also produced a tool and exercise for them to review a critical path of a particular product together with a key supplier to look for areas of improvement. So the MSIs support their companies to put this learning into action, and we really encourage them to do it in partnership with suppliers. So looking at that process diagram, how are we doing? How are the companies doing on this? So the green is that they've already done that step. The orange is they're on the way, and the red is they haven't started that step yet. So this is kind of the order that we've been encouraging companies to take these progress steps in. So a lot of them have already done some supplier engagement and feedback, and we encourage them to do that on an ongoing basis, not just a one-off, that they've got together a cross-functional team, they've done that procurement mapping exercise, they're doing some training internally, and inviting suppliers to the meetings. And now they're working on building up that risk assessment, that action plan, and checking it with suppliers and discussing that. So let's have a think about what some of the practical changes are that companies are starting to make. One of the really interesting things that has been feedback from the companies is that they are now having much more frequent video calls with supply chain partners. That's really key, because we believe that that is the first step to making any other change, is having that better trust and relationship, having open discussions about challenges and finding shared solutions. So I'm not going to talk about this slide, all of it in detail. You'll get the slides afterwards. But here are some of the changes that and the things that companies are implementing. They're looking at having a checklist for tech packs to make sure they're complete, having video calls to confirm samples, and monitoring how many samples per order. So all of that is effort towards reducing the burden of sampling on suppliers. In terms of critical path adherence, checking the critical path with suppliers and encouraging that feedback. One interesting situation is a company reported that if they need to delay the delivery of a product in terms of figures or storage, that they would normally just ask the supplier to hold that stock. But now they would pay for the stock and have it delivered later. That sounds like a small thing, but manufacturers say that is a really, really key problem for them. So that's great to hear that's adjusting. Some other ideas of people working on this: they're using excess material to make new products. They're updating their forecasts and giving information more frequently, and agreeing capacity with suppliers, and if it's not filled, filling that with repeat products. So in terms of understanding progress, the primary focus of the LIC is to support practical changes within companies in partnership with their manufacturers. And we are planning to develop some guidelines to measure progress, and that will be based on the HRDD process. And so it's basically tracking the process that supports change. And the MSIs that have systems to measure progress of their brand members are certainly integrating elements of the common framework. So these are some of the tools that we have available on our website. We really want companies to use those to support improvements, MSIs to use them to support companies. And obviously, if people use them, it's really great to maintain the IP that is on there. So now we're going to have a panel discussion. We have Britta from Norwegian Concept. We have Stevie Lee from Hobbs, the buying manager from Hobbs. We should have Haroon from Pakistan, but his computer, hooray, he's working. It's fantastic. Amazing. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I would love to start off by asking Haroon, why do you think action on responsible purchasing practices is important?
Hilary, thanks a lot for bringing up this responsible purchasing matter into limelight. It is the key for the benefit of customer and the supplier as a partner. What I believe is the buyer and supplier should understand that they are the partners actually, and they are working together to bring the best product for the ultimate customers. But another thing is the buyer should be understanding that the supplier has to do a lot of the workmanship, as well as have to manage the workers as well. So they should start with a document which is called purchase order. It should be very crystal clear, and it should have every detail from A to Z, so that the supplier can understand, and the supplier should be understanding that purchase order as a partner, and as well as must be if he has any question to ask, then it should be asked in the early stages instead of waiting till the last.
Yeah.
So what I believe is that if it goes like that, then it will be much easier, hassle-free partnership. But this is a ever-changing world, and I understand that last-moment changes do happen, and it is as per the customer. So what happens here, that the buyer and supplier should understand each other's capability, and what happens here is that if they increase the capability, they understand each other's capability, then they will work together. And what will happen, since the supplier have to look after the workers, so buyer should understand that if there is any loss occurred by any means, by delay or by change in the packaging or anything, that it should be partnered with the supplier, so that things can work on, and it will be a win-win situation in that case.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, Haroon. Thank you so much for that. Stevie Lee, what do you think? Why do you think action on responsible purchasing practices is important?
I think it's important now more than ever because the economy is unstable, fashion is changing, and pace is becoming, more important at every level of fashion. So if we can understand the real life impacts of our decisions, and as Haroon said, as big or small as they are, for example, a late approval, if we know what that will actually do to the people in our supply chain, it will make us question them decisions, which I think is really important for every brand.
Fantastic. And Britta, would you like to tell us a bit about what you think the benefits to your business has been of participating in this community?
Yes, so one benefit with the LRC is learning from other companies and from suppliers in order to improve our practices. And getting new insights, like practical insight, has helped us understand how supply chain is affected by both good and bad practices. So we built a closer link between CSR and commercial teams. Now we have weekly meetings on RPP, and before this journey started, we met less frequently. We've been inspired to find better ways of working and improve our routines, both in-house and towards our partners. We see a great advantage in investing and spending more time with our existing partnerships. Long term, we believe the changes we implement will benefit our partners and workers in our supply chain.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that it has been a benefit. That was all the things we were hoping for. So that's great. It's starting to move forward. So Haroon, I'd love to come back to you. What do you feel has been the benefit to manufacturers of participating in the community? Are you there, Haroon?
Yes, I can hear.
Oh, sorry. Can you unmute again? Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
The connection is not that good. That's fine. Yes, it's beneficial because we are learning from each other, you know, this communication between the buyer and the supplier thing. And obviously learning from the others' experiences is the key for everything, you know. So that is what the benefit we are having, and as well as we understanding what the other communities are doing. So this is the way we are learning from each other. This is the benefit I think we are having.
Thank you so much, Haroon. And maybe Stevie Lee, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been putting into practice as a result of the community?
Yeah, I think, Hilary, you mentioned it, but we reworked our critical path, which is easier to understand for both us and suppliers, and a bit more of a collaboration. So we have made it much simpler for them to implement into it and us to update it. And that's been rolled out in the last few months, and it's made a massive difference. We thought it'd be actually more work, and it's made it all smoother. Yeah. So it's that kind of collaboration piece alongside what I was saying before about understanding what changes you make and the impact that has. So we always question every change. And if we do need to make a change, because that happens, we will work collaboratively with the supplier. We've also been doing off-site meetings as part of LIC with design, tech, the CSR team, and really discussing everything that we're doing and what we're putting into place. We've done exercises, as you mentioned, on the critical path. We then had a call with one of our key suppliers, actually, and it was the buying team and CSR together. And it's probably the first time we've done that. And both teams were on the same page. And it really opened our eyes into, we don't ask the supplier enough what they're dealing with and how we can help. So I think we've got industry, but doing it together with CSR was really, really beneficial. And I think the suppliers are now opening up to us, which is brilliant.
Fantastic. That's really good to hear. Thank you, Stevie. And Britta, what do you think? What's Norwegian Concept been implementing as a result of being involved in the community?
A key change has been increased direct engagement with suppliers, including more meetings and also gathering feedback from them on the impacts of our purchasing practices to guide our actions. More regular meetings by video and in person have strengthened our bond and been beneficial in many ways, finding new ways to work together, even on new products. So we've developed a standard agenda for those meetings that includes a time of open discussion about any challenges, and giving space for that has meant we can detect potential issues earlier and find solutions together. Our internal team working on RPP have developed new routines, a new sourcing strategy, and updated procedures for new suppliers to involve RPP elements. Internal support from senior management and anchoring have helped us to initiate training and information sharing across departments.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And moving forward, Britta, what are you planning to work on moving forward?
Yeah, we will focus on improving information flow with our partners and sharing more in-depth timelines and plans, especially building in better communication and information with new partners. And in our new sourcing strategy, we'll be looking at KPIs related to responsible purchasing practices to track progress in the departments. It might include something like conversion rates on how many samples are needed to sign off a product to try to make that more efficient and reduce the burden of samples on our partners.
Yeah, fantastic. Those are good things to be working on. What about you, Stevie? What are you guys thinking about moving forward? What are you planning to work on?
I think we've identified 3 really key suppliers that need our help with production planning at the moment in order to manage their factory. So we're working on it at the moment. We've just started the autumn winter strategy. So we are working on giving them really clear production plans per month so that they can really kind of forward plan. And that's been really, really important to those 3 key suppliers that need our support. And then just to echo what Britta said about we're monitoring our hit rate now going forward. So we will be looking at how many samples we develop, how many options we book, and how we can improve that.
Yeah,
really key things, I think.
That's fantastic. And do you guys have an example of a situation where you've a situation that you've had recently that represents a kind of move more towards this kind of partnership approach with suppliers? Maybe Britta, can you share an example of that?
Yes. So in one of our meetings with the supplier in China, where we gave them an open opportunity to share any challenges, and they said they had a lot of excess fabric from one of our orders. So we discussed internally and worked with the supplier to develop a new product, a padded seat cushion for hiking to use the fabric. So the supplier told us this made them feel really like a partner. And we also have done the same recently with a different supplier who had excess fleece material. And then we made the neck warmers. And that is a really relevant product for the market.
Yeah. This is so interesting. We had Jerry, who works at the Chinese factory that Norwegian Concept was working with, speaking at one of the meetings, and he said his personal opinion was, you know, this approach of actually being willing to look for solutions together and to be flexible really made them feel like partners, and it felt like this business relationship was quite different to some of the others they had, which is really encouraging. You know, that is the fundamental thing that we're working towards, and these are some of the very practical changes that can actually make that happen. So yes, one of the issues that manufacturers have mentioned is being left with a lot of excess fabric when orders change, or when the order is less than they thought it would be, or whatever it is, that is a big financial loss for them. So this is a really great solution, is trying to think of new products that could use that excess fabric. What do you think of that, Haroon? Do you have any view of that approach of trying to use excess fabric in new products, or trying to find solutions together in partnership?
It's very good to hear from Britta and Stevie that the way they are moving forward and the way they are developing the partnership. This is the key element to develop the partnership. Since yet, I'm sorry to say, I haven't seen anything like it on my side, but I have heard many things like that, but the things are changing now, you know. Hilary, these kind of sessions which you are doing, it's bringing a change between the relationship of the buyers and the suppliers. Now they are becoming a partner instead of only having a business relation. Yeah. Since yet I haven't seen anything, but since what I'm hearing from the Britta and the Stevie, it's wonderful, and I hope things will get much better ahead after these kind of sessions, these kind of communications.
Yeah, thank you, Haroon. I think That's the point. At the moment, maybe these are fairly isolated incidents, but the whole point of the learning and implementation community is to make these kinds of things more common across the industry, not only with the companies within the community, but also then making those resources available to other companies beyond that. So what about you, Stevie Lee? Do you have an example of a situation that represents kind of moving towards that partnership approach?
I think on talking about partnership, we've had a recent situation with a supplier where they were really struggling in one of their factories because of staff turnover and lots of different factors to get to our quality standards. And I think what we've done, which perhaps may have been different to previous years, is that we sent our head of technical out there, straight out there to Morocco. She met with the whole team in the factory, sat down with them, spent time with them, going through every little bit of, you know, new processes. How do they need our help? How can we support? All done in their factory, in their kind of safe space, if you like, and then brought that back with some really clear planning pieces for the next 6 months. So it's part of that kind of collaborating and working together rather than just kind of us being the one all the time, which it has been really, really positive.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And that's actually been a piece of feedback that we've had from manufacturers within the meetings is, you know, instead of just having emails flying around the place, let's actually have more video calls, let's have more face-to-face real meetings, because that's the place in which we feel we're able to be more honest and we can make some solutions and build that partnership. So what about challenges that you faced? Stevie, what do you think? What has there been anything that has been challenging or an obstacle, and how have you guys overcome that?
I think margin and profit is obviously a big one for any brand at the moment, and also the pace of change and adapting to, you know, weather and the economy. But we're really lucky that we have had the support of the management team. So getting the management team on board really early stages for us means that all of these big levers that we have to pull as a brand, they're on board with what we're saying, they're on board with LIC, they're on board with discussing ways of change and how we improve it. So I think getting them involved and putting a business case of how this is really going to kind of work towards a better way of purchasing has been really, really beneficial.
Fantastic. And as we come to conclude, Haroon, would you like to give a bit of advice from your perspective? What's your advice to other manufacturers and also to brands and retailers who are wanting to work together to improve purchasing practices? What would your advice be?
Hilary, really key element about it is the crystal clear paperwork first. Once we did the crystal clear purchase order and we discuss everything and move forward with that, that is the advice to the manufacturer, to understand that purchase orders and these. Once we do that, obviously that is something which will help us to carry on the business on a partnership basis, as well as you said, that we should communicate openly and do not hide anything. This is for the suppliers. Do not hide anything from the buyer so that they can make out or take out something from it and both can work together.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you so much, Haroon. I think that's really highlights the importance of one of the examples that Stevie gave, which was actually providing the critical path and the tech packs in a way that is really clear and simple to understand, and in a way that invites feedback from suppliers so that it's actually agreed collaboratively rather than just sent in one direction. And really, you know, we've been finding, as we've been discussing, of course, manufacturers are the experts on the technical aspects of this. So actually getting their feedback on tech packs before they're confirmed is really important, and making sure all of that information is clear before time is wasted on too many samples to get it clear later. So that's a really good piece of advice. Thank you so much, Haroon. What's your advice, Britta, to other companies who are wanting to take action on responsible purchasing practices?
Yeah, so we have 4 ideas in terms of advice. So the first one is work on getting support from the management team and engage them in the process. It is vital that the management knows the importance of RPP and also create close cooperation between commercial and CSR team. It's important that both sides understand the value of the teamwork and also prioritize time. And working together makes it easier to make a change. And next point, involving supply chain partners. This has been absolutely key for our learning and progress. It involves getting their honest feedbacks, having more regular conversations. We found it so helpful to provide space for challenges to be raised, and then building trust by acting on it and being flexible to find solutions together. So be curious, ask questions, be open, and be willing to learn. At last, reach out to fellow brands in the industry. We are likely struggling with the same situations and challenges. So you can share and learn together on how to take action on responsible purchasing practices.
That's great. And Stevie, do you want to also give any advice in terms of other companies taking an approach and seeking to improve?
I think in summary, just progress over perfection. We can't change the world all at once, but every little change, like I was saying about changing a sleeve or, you know, redoing a critical path, it's all about progress, and we're all on a journey, and every little thing that a brand can do will make better purchasing practices for the supply chain.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yes, don't wait until you get everything perfectly in a line and make a start. I agree with that totally. Well, I'd just really like to thank our panel members today. Thank you, Haroon, for joining us from Pakistan. Thank you, Britta, for joining us from Norway, and Stevie from the UK. Thank you so much for your time, and stick around for the questions. Maybe someone might ask a question to you guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to the presentation now. So does anyone have any questions? You could have a question to one of the panelists. You could have a question to the group who developed the common framework, or the group who've been organising the community. We'd love to hear from you. Great. So, great. This is a good question that's starting us off. So a question for Britta and Stevie. How frequently do you meet with your suppliers to discuss production challenges? And are all the departments involved in terms of development, sourcing and CSR? I expect that probably varies between different situations and between different suppliers, but do either of you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I can jump in. So we historically used to meet, we used to speak to them probably twice every 6 months and go out to our supply base once a season. But we're pretty much having weekly calls now. If anything arises, we just get on a video call. So I think that's something we've learned from LIC more. But yeah, we get on a video call quite a lot with some of our key suppliers now, way more than usual. And then probably twice a season, we'll have a really big kind of business update. The CSR team will join if there's anything we need to discuss as a team. If not, it will just be the buy-in and tech teams that kind of lead those discussions from our side.
That's great. Britta, do you want to add anything there?
For our side, I think we have 5 strategic partners that are really big. So we prioritize our time with them at the moment. And I think we, of course, want to have weekly meetings with them, but we don't do it because it's a bit difficult to do. But I think we have every second month, we have a video meeting with the team, CSR, and myself, commercial team. So it's really good, and of course we want to meet more often, but at the time being, that is the frequency.
Yeah, Fantastic. And then another question is, what would the panelists say was the key success factor in engaging senior management at brand level? Stevie, do you want to jump in there?
I think putting together a business case of what it means for the business. So it's not something we're doing for fun, although it means a lot to us. It's actually very vital for the business going forward to really take this seriously and give some examples. The CSR team are really good at helping with this, but giving examples of what this will actually do for our business and how we move forward and our kind of 5-year plan. So it's putting together a really solid business case, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Britta, do you want to add anything to that in terms of engaging senior management?
No, I don't have anything to add on that. It's just brief them, make it like show them practical examples why this is important. And that is also now onwards from now working on more in-depth information sharing with the management to follow up and also with the other departments. That's going to be our main focus.
Yes, I actually would love to just see whether Francesca is on the call from TFG. Francesca, are you?
I am, yes.
Would you, someone specifically asked the question, how did you develop the business case? I know that you worked very closely with your commercial teams. Francesca is responsible. Well, do you want to say your job title and just maybe give a little idea of the process that you took the senior management through to help them understand the business case?
Yes, sure. So I'm head of CSR and sustainability for TFG Group. So under the umbrella is obviously Hobbs, but also Phase 8 and Whistles and Inside Story. So we've got quite a large portfolio of brands under the umbrella. Responsible purchasing practices has always been high on our agenda, but we've recently revised our strategy and worked very closely with, from the top down, essentially, looking at how KPIs and accountabilities and values for the organizations are all woven through our strategy. Sustainability is one of our key strategic objectives, and obviously responsible purchasing practices sits within this strategic objective, and the accountable person within the organization for the deliverable, this strategic objective, is our CEO. So because obviously all the KPIs are linked to that role, there is an interest in then trickling down the strategy from the top. We have analyzed various scenarios as to, why if we don't address responsible purchasing practices, what would be the scenarios for the business, particularly post-COVID, where having that strong relationship with suppliers essentially made us a very resilient business. And I think that we value that, where the CEO has direct relationships with every single supplier in our supply chain. And this sort of like way of doing business is then mirrored by the product directors in each brand, the likes of Stevie, but all the teams are involved. So it's not just a Stevie problem to deal with purchasing practices. It is a problem of all the product teams, of all the finance team, of all the everyone across the business.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for jumping in. Sorry for jumping to jump on you. Very kind of you to jump in. Thank you so much, Francesca. So I think really Francesca was very proactive in terms of actually speaking the language of the senior managers and actually putting a business case together with data that really spoke to them. I think Stevie mentioned that in our conversation. So let's move on to another question. This one is around kind of getting the clarity around the design and the tech specs. So the question is, I was wondering how you arrange the cooperation with your designers, since not everyone designs the same in the style sheet, and the size spec that matches it sometimes gives confusion for the supplier. The fit might sometimes be the same, but the sketch isn't always. So what do you guys think in terms of how that can be clarified in terms of the actual information from the designers to the suppliers to make sure that that's clear? Do either of you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can. So we make sure it's fundamental, and I think you mentioned it earlier, to have a really clear tech pack. So our design team put every single detail on that tech pack that is possible. We also refer to key blocks because we have really long-standing relationships with suppliers, so they can refer back to kind of key patterns that we've used in the past. And also we put in a bill of materials, so every material and trim is on there that they need. And then we work with the tech team who input the measurements with them. So we work combined so that the measurements are consistent on what we would do across the brand. So our suppliers shouldn't be alarmed by anything that they receive, but if they are, we have a really open dialogue, and we're starting to do spec handover on a video call now as well. So they should be able to ask any questions that they can, but it's just a really thorough tech pack.
Yeah, that's great. And Wilco, do you want to jump in on the question about aligning approaches in terms of the OECD guidelines? You've got that question there. Maybe you can summarize that question and give a response.
Yeah, of course. So hey everybody, my name's Wilco Borst. I work for Fair Foundation. I'm part of the MSI working group. And you mean the question related to how does it relate to human rights due diligence, basically, and how does it fit in? I already answered to Bart in the chat as well, but I think it's a really good question, and maybe it's also good to emphasize that we really see this as part of the brand's responsibility to incorporate this within their human rights due diligence approach. So it's not a standalone thing to work on your purchasing practices, but you need to follow the 6 steps of human rights due diligence, and especially when you look at risks, and we all know that when it comes to the garment industry and purchasing practices, that's actually a very high risk in the industry. So every brand should be aware of that and check, in the risk assessment, go back, check their purchasing patterns and say, okay, what are potential risks for human rights in the way we do business? And if you identify risks, then start to assess that basically together with the suppliers, together with workers, together with trade unions, and see, okay, what's the potential harm that could be done and how can we mitigate this? That's something we do within the learning implementation community, so that's where the risk assessment came from, but it really needs to be embedded in your human rights diligence approach.
Okay, just to say, I think your microphone might be a bit tricky, so might use Sophie's microphone if we get another question. But thank you very much for responding to that. I think really the key point here is that reviewing responsible purchasing practices has to be integrated into the normal process of human rights due diligence within a company. So it is really looking at what are the potential impacts of our own actions and mitigating those and reducing those and addressing those. And that falls within the normal human rights due diligence process, which involves all of the different elements that are mentioned there. So I think we're going to move on now to move back to the presentation. And thank you so much for your questions. We want to make sure that we finish even a little bit early, radical. Just to invite you to a kind of, this is not organized by the MSI working group, but it is related topic. So we want to flag it up. So this is an in-person event in Bonn. So anyone who's in Germany, prick up your ears and listen to this. This is an in-person event on responsible contracting. And it's basically on the role of contracts in the upcoming legislation and in integrating responsible contracting in your HREDD systems. It will include updates on regulatory developments, insights from brands and manufacturers, and best practices and tools from the Responsible Contracting Project. So the email is there to find out more about that, and we will send out these slides after the session so you can have that. So just to kind of leave you with some useful resources, these are the resources that you can find on the website. Obviously, you can find the common framework there. You can also find that procurement cycle mapping exercise, which basically is an exercise for an internal cross-functional team across CSR, commercial, design, finance, to say what is currently happening within our purchasing at each different stage of the cycle, and what then are some of the potential impacts of that. There's also the initial impact and risk assessment tool, which basically under each principle helps companies to map against the common framework elements what their current practices are, what the supplier feedback is, and what some initial ideas for actions are. There's also a summary there on some of the purchasing practices training that is available. I'd really highly recommend particularly the short video that's been developed by PST, which is kind of an introduction to purchasing practices. So if you want to send something to different people internally within your company, that's a really helpful introductory video that's available for free. The ILO Better Work has also developed an e-learning tool. Better Buying also has some e-learning. So there's lots of resources that you can dig into there. There's also on that page an engagement, a briefing about engaging with suppliers, gaining feedback, and working with suppliers on improvements. So all those resources are there. So have a look around our website. And if you have any questions or if you want to get in contact with us, that is the email. So we just want to thank you so much for taking time out today to talk to us and to listen to our update. We're really grateful that you joined us today. Thank you so much. And I also particularly want to thank Tamar, Haroon, Stevie and Britta for their input today, and our surprise speaker, Francesca, thanks for joining in. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you, Hilary, for bringing up all together. And I'm hopeful that this will develop the partnerships between the buyer and supplier and will bring change to many things in the future. I'm sure it's about it.
Thank you so much, Haroon. We really appreciate you joining today. Thank you.
Hooray.